pictures now from Tahrir Square. That's in central Cairo. It's full of opponents of the deposed president and supporters of the military, the focal point of the 2011 revolution. Huge crowds also gathered here on June 30th, just over 3 weeks ago, ahead of the military takeover and ousting of Mohamed Morsi. So that's the scene in Tahrir Square. The military supporters are also out in front of the presidential palace, a symbol of power and authority. There we've got the scene in front of the presidential palace there. A huge crowd thronging the avenue in front of the palace. And earlier, military helicopters were flying over the crowds gathered there. So that's the scene outside the presidential palace. Meanwhile, the main anti-military protests continue to be held in the Cairo suburb of Nasser City. Mohamed Morsi's supporters have been protesting here even before he was pushed out of power. They want him restored to office. So this is the scene right now in Nasser City. There are also anti-military protests at Cairo University in Giza. This is one of the biggest squares and main landmarks in Greater Cairo. Protests, as we've been reporting, have been taking place in cities and towns across Egypt. In Alexandria, violent scenes with opposing sides throwing rocks and firing shotgun pellets. We've got live pictures from Egypt's second city, and we can see that the violence is continuing between rival groups. 5 people have been killed so far in the clashes, and more than 24 other people hurt. A very heavy military presence there is there to try and keep the two rallies apart, but there you can see the clashes continue between rival groups. Our correspondents are covering the story across Egypt for us. In a moment, we'll speak to Rawia Rage, who's in our Cairo bureau, and Jamal El-Shayal, who's in Nasser City for us. But first, let's go live to Nicole Johnston, who's in Alexandria. And Nicole, the clashes are continuing there in Alexandria.
Well, despite the pictures that you're seeing, the scene here is actually a lot calmer than it was earlier on. We just walked around the Khalid Al-Ibrahim Mosque. There were people praying. It was a peaceful scene there. The mosque was not being attacked. Down the other end of the streets, there are still some skirmishes and clashes going on between the two sides. This has been going on for a number of hours now. Every now and then it picks up, and then there'll be a lull. We haven't seen the military or the police on the streets for the last couple of hours, though they were here earlier trying to keep both sides apart. So that's the situation here. On the other side of town, though, in the City Gaba district, there is a rally in support of the military. It's been going on for a couple of hours. A few thousand people are gathered there, but that area has been largely sealed off by the military. There's a very strong presence there. They're surrounding all of the streets to try and keep the rally against the military apart from the rally for the military. So that's the scene in Alexandria at the moment.
Right, let's go now to Rawia Rage, who is in our Cairo bureau for us. And Rawia, the military chief had been calling for protests across the country, a mandate to fight the violence and terrorists. They had wanted a repeat of June 30th, didn't they? Are we seeing crowds as big as then?
Well, we are certainly seeing large numbers. You can probably tell the scene behind me at Tahrir Square in a celebratory mood, really. This is a celebration, not a demonstration for the people gathered in Tahrir Square and outside the presidential palace. The numbers flowing outside the square into the bridge behind me, the helicopters flying at such a low altitude, dropping flags at the crowd, sending them into a frenzy. Certainly the hero of that crowd is his defense minister, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, a man there earlier telling me when I asked him, why did you come down today? And he tells me, well, because simply no one can say no to Sisi. Another man, we are told, outside the presidential palace had the following written on his car. Not only would I give Sisi my word, my mandate, I'd give him the key to my apartment. So just indicative of that cult status that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the defense minister, has succeeded in achieving in just such a short period in the past few weeks after Mohamed Morsi was removed from office. Just to give you an indication, at this time, normally, Shakuntala, we would be seeing Egyptians at home watching TV after breaking their fast and Ramadan. People familiar with this country would tell you this is prime time TV time for people with special broadcasting during the holy month. But all TV stations, state and local TVs, suspended their regular programming to encourage people to come out to the streets and back the call by Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in a very clear campaign raising the sentiments against those who have been gathering in defense of the deposed president for the past few weeks, as my colleague Jamal al-Shayal is probably best suited to tell you from where he is.
Out here now for 29 days, entering almost their second month in the coming hours. Now, the main message that has been blared out across the speakers, across the sound systems behind me and through the messages that have been coming out from the organizers is that this is a peaceful sit-in. This is a peaceful movement against the military rule, against the coup d'etat, against what they describe as the removal of democracy from Egypt. Aside from those messages of persistence, insistence rather, that this will be a peaceful movement, and persistence that they will remain steadfast in their demand that ousted President Mohamed Morsi be reinstated, there had been some political developments behind the scenes, namely the meeting between Muslim Brotherhood leaders as well as others of their allies and Britain's Deputy Foreign Minister Alistair Burt, who's responsible for the Middle East, North Africa region, who was in Egypt over the past 48 hours. As far as I understand from one of those who was attending that meeting, the demands made were very clear, in that the Muslim Brotherhood, being the main force behind this but not the sole representatives of the anti-military movement, are willing to negotiate everything and anything so long as Morsi is reinstated. Now, they say that they're even willing to allow for what they've called a safe exit or a safe passage for General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who they accuse of committing high treason in the coup d'etat. They also say that if Morsi is returned, they're also willing to discuss maybe him giving up some of his powers and maybe nominating somebody else, an interim prime minister, to have some of those powers in order to allow for civilian rule to re-establish itself. Now, that is the main political development that has taken place. However, obviously, the British don't have or don't wield the same influence as the Americans do on the military, Egypt being the second largest receiver of foreign military aid, obviously, after Israel. So the message here is that they will continue in this peaceful sit-in, and their demand remains the same, the reinstatement of Mohamed Morsi.
Okay, Jamal, thank you. From Alexandria, Nicole